Hello guys, this is Chef Dominguez and this is student Isel Marquez. Welcome to another Chef Share session, Fall 2021. Today we're going to be talking about pie dough and we're going to be making two different kinds of pies. Let's go! Alright, before we start mixing, I want to talk real fast about pie dough. Pie dough can be made into either mealy dough or a flaky dough, but it basically uses exactly the same recipe, which is also a very, very easy ratio of 3 parts flour, 2 parts fat, and 1 part liquid. Now it's very important that all the ingredients are very cold. Actually, our ingredients, we kept them in the fridge overnight if possible, or at least a couple of hours, at least 30 minutes. That way they're really, really cold when you are about to mix them. That way the fat that you're using doesn't melt down with the warmth of your hands or the warmth of the machine that you're using as a friction while you're mixing it. All right, and really quick about the ingredients, you want to use AP flour or pastry flour. You could use bread flour, which has a higher protein content, which is going to give you a more sturdier product, but I like to keep it with all-purpose flour, just for a regular pie dough. Now, as your fat, you can use either shortening or butter. The only difference is that shortening, it's going to give you a more flakier final product, and butter, it's going to give you a more richer, denser product. Right? And as for the liquid, you can use cold water. It's what we typically use, but you can also use milk, cream, which is going to give a darker color final product and also a richer, denser product. And if you want something that's really crispy, you can even also use vodka, because alcohol evaporates quicker than water. So that's going to give you a very flaky crust. For these purposes, we're just using, we're going to make one with shortening and water, all AP flour, and then we're gonna make one with butter and water as well, right? So let's get into the mixing. Here it's student itself. It's gonna show you the way we mix pie dough, which is basically the biscuit method, all right? The biscuit method basically is you have your flour. If you can, make sure it's very cold. You have your fat, in this case it's the shortening, very cold. And she's gonna start to cut the fat into the flour. What that means is that she's gonna start to basically rub the fat into the flour. You can also do this with a dough cutter, or you can make this in the KitchenAid with a paddle attachment at the very lowest speed, which is stir, or 1. You can just start it and just turn it on until you see the size, the pieces of lumps of fat the size you want them. Now this first one that we're gonna make, because it's shortening, we're gonna make a flaky dough. So you wanna see fairly larger pieces of fat. So you don't wanna see that the dough has become all one. You don't wanna see that. You wanna see pieces still of fat that are fairly large. About, I'd like to call it for mealy doughs, about pea-sized pieces of fat. And for flaky dough, larger than that, right? So she's just gonna continue to cut the fat into the flour. And for amounts this small, you don't really need a machine, but again, if you want to make it faster, I highly recommend the first time you do it. That way you get the feel with your hands and you can see what you're doing. Do it by hand, and then once you kind of know how it's supposed to look, then you can jump into doing into a KitchenAid or a hand mixer, right? So you're just gonna continue to do it, more. And this is the reason why you want your fat so cold, because you have to manipulate the fat between your hands, and your hands will naturally, there's heat in your hands, so by manipulating the fat, if your fat is not cold enough, you run the risk of melting the fat, which completely defeats the purpose of what you're doing. So this is why you like to keep your ingredients very cold. Even the water that we have right now, when I weigh it out in ounces, I actually put a couple of ice cubes in there and I stick it in the fridge. That way I know that it's very, very cold. Whether it's milk, whether it's vodka, whatever type of liquid, if you wanna flavor your pie dough, whether it's savory or sweet, maybe you want to use chicken stock. If you're gonna make chicken pot pies instead of just plain water, you can totally do that. Just make sure it's the correct amount and make sure it's cold. Um, if it's a sweet pie, maybe you want to make some tea, some probably a lavender tea or a hibiscus tea, which is going to give you a little bit of color in the dough as well. Just make it. Just make sure that before you use it, it's cold, all right? But that's another tip you can get to. You don't need to put flavor in the pie dough because all the flavor is gonna come from the filling, right? But if you wanna be a little bit extra, you can totally do that. Also, if you're doing, per se, a savory pie, you can also add some fine herbs to the dough, mix them in with the flour, and then just add your fat. So at this point, I just want you to see if you can lift up. That looks like crumbly. It doesn't look like it's coming together. But if you see, there's some pieces of fat that are fairly large still. This is what you want for a flaky dough, all right? You want to see still pieces of fat intact like that. This is what's gonna make your dough to be flaky, all right? So at this point, she's gonna start to add the water or your liquid. Now, keep in mind, sometimes it doesn't need all the liquid that the recipe calls for. So she's gonna start to add it little by little, probably in 3 additions. I'm just gonna add you more. So I always reserve a little bit, just in case it didn't need it. And then if you add it all at once, per se me that I did weight it and I added a couple of ice cubes, but let's say you didn't weight it and you did add some ice cubes that added to the actual correct measurement, and you can end up with a very loose dough with which is going to make a very sticky dough, and it's going to make it just impossible for you to work with it. So that's why you want to hold on to it. But if the same dough is not coming together, it's going to let you know. This probably is going to need it all, but it's going to let you know if you need to add the rest or not. All right. So all you want to do, you don't want to overwork this dough. Again, because you are dealing with the fat, you don't want to melt the fat, but also because you don't want to develop a lot of gluten, all right? Remember, once you wet any type of wheat flour, as you manipulate it, you create more gluten, and your final product is going to be tougher, so you don't want to do that either. So you probably need it all. Probably need a little bit more, actually. You see, this is why we always check. All you want to see to make sure that the dough is ready, it's that it comes together. It's not gonna look smooth and perfect. It's not. But you wanna see that it holds together. Grab the other water. So it looks like, right? So as you can see, she's being very gentle. She's not going crazy, she's not overworking it, she's just trying to make the dough come together as one. Probably a little bit more. What do you think it's in? More? Yes? That should do. Yeah. Make sure you are scraping all the way to the bottom of the bowl. If you are using a KitchenAid, make sure you're scraping, because remember, dry ingredients are going to tend to stick to the bottom of the bowl. So you have to make sure that those are also getting incorporated into the dough. All right, so it's looking good. It's looking like it's coming together. Again, it's not going to look perfectly smooth because we have those clumps of butter in there, of shortening in this case. But that's completely what you want. Now that basically she can press it and it forms a ball, it's coming together, that's exactly what you want. You don't want to overwork it past this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to let it rest for about 15 minutes in the fridge. The reason why, it's because at this point, again with the gluten, you are manipulating the dough and you are getting it stressed. So if you try to just go ahead and roll it, there's 2 things. First of all, you already kind of heated up the fat to the point where if you start stretching it, you're just gonna continue to melt that fat. And the second one, it's because the gluten is stressed. And if you are able to roll it out, once you cut the pieces that you want or you put them into your pie shell, once you bake it, it's gonna shrink. It's gonna shrink very bad on you because it's stressed. It needs to first relax to actually keep its shape, all right? So we're gonna go ahead and cover this with plastic, and we're gonna put it in the fridge for about 10 to 15 minutes. And we'll be back to actually roll our pies. All right, so like I said, we're gonna cover this dough with plastic wrap. Make sure the plastic wrap is touching the dough. That way there's no skin forming, dry skin forming on the dough. And we're gonna place this in the fridge for about 15 minutes. And while I do that, she is mixing the same exact recipe. The only difference is that instead of shortening, she's using butter. And instead of being a flaky dough like this one, where we left the fat pieces larger than peas, she's gonna make a mealy dough, which is gonna be smaller chunks of fat in there. All right, so she's gonna continue to cut the fat into the flour until we get about pea-sized shapes of fat. All right, this is gonna be for our mealy dough. Now, why are we making two types of dough? The difference is that you want a flaky dough for pies that don't have such a liquidy filling. She's making a more sturdy type of dough with exactly the same recipe because we're gonna have a filling that's a little bit more liquidy. We're gonna make pumpkin pie with this one, which it's a custard pie. So when we make the pumpkin filling, you're gonna notice it's very liquidy. So if we use more of a flaky dough, the chances are that it's when the pie is already baked and you go ahead and cut it, it's gonna be very soggy, all right? So you need a more of a Mealy dough for that. And the flaky dough we're gonna use for a cherry pie, which the filling it's a little bit thicker. So you don't need it to be that, you can let it be more flaky, right? So we're gonna, for the cherry pie, we're gonna actually part bake or blind bake our base, our pie shell. And then we're gonna fill it with a cherry filling, and then we're gonna put it back with a nice lace on top. Well, that's why you wanna have, and you wanna know how to make those two types of dough. It really depends on the type of filling that you're gonna put in the pie, all right? So she's gonna continue to do that, again, until we have pea-sized shape of fat. She's gonna continue to do that. I'll show you right now. I'm gonna go ahead and put this real quick in the fridge, okay? While we're waiting for our other dough to rest and get a little bit cold for us to be able to manipulate and roll into our pie shell by our pie tin, Itzel mixed the second dough, which is gonna be our mealy dough, which, if you can see, it has more of the texture of sand. So the pieces of fat are smaller than the one on your flaky dough, and this is what you want to see. So very pea sizes of fat. It's gonna look a little bit more sandy. So now she's gonna be able to just add the water, and same thing. Add water until it comes together, and we're gonna do the exact same thing. We're gonna cover it with plastic, and we're gonna put it to rest about for 15 minutes. So let's go and see if our other dough is ready. Okay, it's been 15 minutes or a little bit more that our dough has been in the fridge resting and getting a little bit chill. So now we're gonna go ahead and roll it out. So Itzel's gonna roll it out, and we're gonna put it onto our pie tin. The dough that she's rolling is the first one that we made, that it's meant for a flaky dough, which we're gonna use for a cherry pie, all right? So what we're gonna do for that one is we're gonna roll it out onto our tin pan. We're gonna make a nice decoration, and then we're gonna blind bake. What is blind baking or par baking? Basically, it's part baking your pie shell in order for when you have to put the filling and put it back in the oven, it doesn't end up being soggy, all right? Because even if it's not that liquidy, it can become very soggy if it doesn't get enough time in the oven, which your filling might be ready, but the bottom layer, it's gonna be soggy. So you don't want that, and that's why we typically par bake or blind bake the pie dough. You don't need it for all the pies. For example, next with the Mealy dough, we're gonna do a pumpkin pie, and we don't have to blind bake it, but it's recommendable for any type of filling that it's gonna be that doesn't require a lot of time back in the oven, right? So she's gonna start to roll it out, and she'll need abundant amounts of flour. That way the dough just doesn't stick to her rolling pin. If you want to, you can put some on your rolling pin as well. That way it doesn't stick to your rolling pin. Because remember, this has fairly large amounts of fat within the dough. So you can find that the fat gets really stuck to the surface or the rolling pin, right? And just like she's doing, to keep it fairly round, you can continue to rotate the dough as you are rolling it. That way it keeps a fairly round shape. It really doesn't matter, because once we put it on top of our pie tin, we are gonna trim it out. But again, you do want to make sure it keeps a nice shape. That way you don't have to cut so much excess. Because as you can use the excess, the more you manipulate it, the more the fat gets incorporated into the dough. So the less flaky it's gonna be, especially with the flaky dough. And as you can see, she keeps on adding flour, because it is gonna be very sticky. Don't be afraid of putting good amounts of flour. That way you don't have problem. And always, the other reason why you want to be rotating your dough is just to make sure that it's not getting stuck at the bottom. All right, so just if you keep rotating your dough, you're making sure that it's not stuck at the bottom. And again, if you need more flour, just use more flour. Having your dough cool and chill, it's gonna help prevent all this stickiness too. Right, so she just wants it not too thin, probably a 1/4 of an inch thick. So what you can do is you can measure it with your pie tin. If it already covers the pie tin and has a good thickness, then we can go ahead and lift up the dough. She's basically gonna roll it into the rolling pin. Like that, makes the job easier. And then you can just place it on top, just like that. Now, now that it's in here, you do want to make sure that the pie dough, it's going all the way and making 90-degree angles in the mold. Because if you leave it just like it is right now, once it bakes, like let's say I'm gonna trim it right here. Once it bakes, the dough is just gonna shrink to the corners, and it's gonna make a hole in the pie. So you want to make sure you go all the way down. You make sure it is in the corners, right? You want to make sure that the sides are okay too. Again, one more time, I'm just making sure that it's right there. Right, and right now, again, it depends what type of pie you're doing. Right now, we are gonna trim it using a paring knife or a pizza cutter, that's fine. This is gonna be a cherry pie, and we are gonna make a lattice top. So I'm cutting it almost to the edge, and I'm just gonna make some pinches around so it looks a little bit nice. And then the lattice will go on top of that. But again, first we're gonna par bake it, because it's a cherry filling, which is not gonna require a lot of time in the oven, and I don't wanna run the risk of having a soggy bottom, all right? So in here, I'm just gonna make a couple of pinches just to make the edge a little bit nice. It's still gonna have the lace, so it's gonna be very nice. And to make these pinches, I'll show you a little bit better with the pumpkin pie again. But basically, you are using your thumb and these two other fingers, and you're just doing this motion. All right? You can also use a fork. You can leave it like that. You can leave it plain and then cut out pieces from this dough that you have left over. You can cut pieces out and just stick them to the edge with some egg wash. It's an infinite worth of pie decoration. But right now we're just gonna make it like this, because any house is gonna have a lattice top. So now, because we're gonna blind bake this, we have to put some weight on it. They do sell special weights for this, but you don't need anything special. You can do it with either rice or beans. So I'm gonna put a liner. This is just a round piece of parchment paper, and we're gonna fill it with some beans. And very obviously the rice or the beans that you use, just keep them around and save them in a Ziploc bag or something so you can keep using them for that same purpose. So this is gonna put weight on my shell, and it's gonna help it to hold its shape, all right? Because if I were to put this empty without any type of filling, it's just gonna shrink very badly. Something other that you might wanna do, it's if you want to, you can poke a couple of very tiny holes at the bottom of your pie dough. This is just, again, so it doesn't try to fluff up on you, all right? Now, if you're having something that's very liquid, for example, once I make the pumpkin pie, you don't want to do that because those holes are gonna basically, the filling's gonna run out from there. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and bake this at 350 for about 15 minutes. You just want a light color. Remember, this is a par bake. You can also, if you are making pies that don't require to be put back in the oven, you can do a fully baked pie shell. Let's say you're making a silky pie, a chocolate silk pie. That doesn't need to go back in the oven once you bake your tin. So instead of doing a par bake, which would be 12-15 minutes, you would go for the full 20-22 minutes until it's completely golden and fully baked, all right? But right now, we are gonna have to put it back in the oven, so we're just gonna do halfway, right? So we're gonna go ahead and put this in the oven for 15 minutes at 350, and then we're gonna pull it out. We're gonna put the filling, we're gonna do some lace on top, and it's gonna go back in the oven for another 20 minutes, all right? Let's get to it. All right, let's put our pie in the oven to blind bake it. Again, it's gonna be about 15 minutes at 350. And while this blind bakes, we are gonna go ahead and use our second dough, which is our Mealy dough, to make a pumpkin pie. So she's basically gonna do the same. She's gonna roll out a piece of the other dough, and we're gonna use it for our pumpkin pie. All right, remember the only difference is that this one, it's gonna be less flaky, it's gonna be a little bit more sturdy, because you're gonna see once we mix our pumpkin pie filling that it's very liquidy, so it would need that. It would totally need that, all right? So while she rolls this out, I do wanna talk about the fillings that can go on pies. Right now, we are doing a fruit pie and a custard pie, which is the pumpkin. Custard pies, like the pumpkin one, a custard, it's basically any liquid that has been thickened by the coagulation of eggs. So anything like a curd, a cheesecake, it's a custard too. A creme brulee, it's a custard, all right? So those are gonna be your type of custard pies. In this case, we're gonna be doing a pumpkin pie. You also have your fruit pies, which you can have a cooked juice pie, a cooked fruit pie, or a fresh fruit pie. The cooked juice, which is the one that we're gonna be doing right now, we're gonna be doing a cherry pie. We did use canned cherries, so all you have to do for a cooked juice is to drain the juice from the fruit, separate it, and then thicken the juice with a slurry, for example. Put back the fruit, and then you use that as a filling. That's cooked juice, all right? If it's cooked fruit, it's meant for fruits that bleed a lot, like berries, let's say a blueberry pie. So whether they're frozen or whether they're fresh, once you apply heat to them, they are gonna bleed a lot of juice. So you do have to thicken it up. So, or even if it's apples, they do bleed a lot too. So the cooked fruit, it's basically when you make a filling, like all the filling, fruit and juice are together in a pan, and you thicken that up and you use that as a filling. Whoops, no problem. There you go. And the third one would be fresh fruit. It can be apples too, which you basically don't do any cooking to the fruit prior to putting them. So basically you slice up apples, put sugar, some spices, and then just throw them all just in your pie shell, and that's it. All right. And while I'll trim this, she's gonna very quickly mix a pumpkin pie filling. right? Other types of pie are cream pies, just like the chocolate silk. That would be considered cream pie. And most of all of those don't require to be put back in the oven. And after that, you also have your chiffon pies, which are basically more a type of a mousse pie, all right? Again, the type that she's gonna make right now, it's a custard pie, which is a pumpkin pie. So you are gonna see some eggs in there. So again, with this pie, I'm gonna trim it. I'm gonna leave a little excess in this one now. Because I want a thicker, since this one is gonna have no lace, nothing really on top, but whipped cream, because we love pumpkin pie with whipped cream. But what I'm gonna do with this one, it's that I'm gonna fold over the excess all the way to the rim. That way, this part is a little bit thicker, right? And it's gonna give me a bigger crimp at the edge. All right, you're just going around, folding that extra. If it's too much, just trim it out. So now that way, as opposed to the other one that we made, it's a little bit thicker. So when you go ahead and crimp it out, whether it's using, again, your thumb and your index, it's gonna look a little bit thicker, right? So I'm just gonna go ahead and crimp it out. Again, all I'm doing is pressing the dough like that. And because this is the pumpkin pie, and this is a Mealy dough, and the pumpkin pie does require a lot of time in the oven, about 30 to 45 minutes. At 325, I do lower the temperature for this one because it's a custard, and you don't want to be too harsh on the temperature. We are not going to part bake this whatsoever. We're going to put it straight like this. In this one, I don't want to make incisions or cuts or holes at the bottom, just because it's a filling that's very liquidy, and I don't want it just to run out and coat the pan instead of being in the actual pie. Just make it pretty. And now we just wait. And pumpkin pie, it's super easy. All it is brown sugar, pumpkin puree, spices, which is you can use the pumpkin mix, pumpkin spice mix, but all it is cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger powder. Some eggs, of course, because it's custard. Some corn syrup. I like to use dark corn syrup instead of light. Vanilla. In this recipe, milk. And this recipe, you'll find different recipes online or in books. This one just has a little bit of pastry flour to help with the thickening. Right, so she's just mixed everything together. Now she's just gonna throw at last the flour. So all these extra dose of pie dough that you have, you can reuse. You just have to be very careful. I wouldn't use it more than twice. Like I wouldn't roll it more than twice. Again, because you're manipulating the dough, you're melting the fat into the dough. But what I highly suggest is don't use them right away. Put them back in the fridge for them to relax. That way it doesn't shrink back on you. And that way the fat within the dough gets a little bit stiffer again for you to manipulate, all right? But you can totally use this. And if you don't want to use it because you're too afraid, you can also, again, cut up pieces and decorate it. All right, so she's done. We are gonna fill it up, fill out our pie. Everything. Un poquito más. that should be it. And again, this is just gonna go into the oven. I am gonna, since it's been about 15 minutes, I am gonna pull off the one that we were par baking. And I'm gonna lower the temperature to 325 just because, again, I don't wanna be too harsh on the custard, but it is gonna be about 30 to 45 minutes, all right? So again, you don't need a lot of color in this one. We're just par baking it, so this is just completely fine. And this one is gonna go into the oven, and I'm just gonna lower the temperature. Be very careful. Again, this filling is very liquidy. And lower the temperature a little bit. And that's it. Now let's go on to the second part of this. Okay, it's been 15 minutes for par baking our pie shell for the cherry pie. So again, you don't need a lot of color. You're just going midway, right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take out our beans or your rice or your wheat, whatever you used. All right, as you see, it doesn't look completely raw at the bottom, which is what we want. It's still gonna get more time baking because we're gonna fill it and put it back in the oven. But this is gonna prevent us from having a very soggy bottom. So now what I'm gonna do is I am gonna put a little bit of egg wash on the sides. This is for my lace to actually stick. And if you need more, you can just add more. Right now, this is my cherry filling. Right, and it's gonna thicken even more in the oven, all right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put some laces. Itzel's a lace. Itzel already rolled some of that extra dough that we have. So now all she's gonna do, she's gonna cut stripes out. For the ease of it, she's just gonna cut them the thickness of the ruler. So just cut them, and then we're gonna put them on top to make our lace, all right? So what you're gonna wanna do is put the first lace, and then we're gonna be intertwining the second part. You don't want this lace top to be extremely thick, but also not paper thin, right? Because it'll get a lot of color before the pie is even done. And if it's too thick, it's gonna be raw while the pie is done already. Right, the other ones. So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna lay them on top. Remember, I put egg wash, so that's gonna help the dough to stick. Just stick one side, actually. You're gonna see why right now. And don't worry, this part we can completely trim it out. All right. All right, so now what you want to do is we're gonna put one in here. Let me pick it up. Sorry. And then the opposite ones. All right, so now the opposite ones. You're gonna lift him. Whoops. Bring them down. And then the opposite ones. And don't worry about the sides because we're gonna trim that out right now. This one's a little bit thick. go. And now you just have to make sure to pinch those edges. Make sure that they are together, that they're secured, and then we're just gonna trim it up. Whoops. There's a paring knife. Oh, sorry. Can you bring some regular sugar? Now we're just gonna trim it out. Hello. And again, you can cut more pieces. You can do a bunch of designs. There's a lot of cool videos to show you how to do a lot of decorations. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put egg wash on top, and we're gonna sprinkle it with some sugar just to get a nice crunch at the top, a little bit more texture. Egg wash is just to get a little bit more of a brown color, all right? And then we're just gonna sprinkle it with some sugar. This adds a nice texture. There you go. The egg wash is gonna help for that sugar to stick to it. And we're gonna go back to the oven. This one, I'm gonna put it in the lower oven because remember, we already changed the temperature for the custard. So this one, again, it's gonna go back at 350. For another like 20 minutes. As long as you see that there's a nice color at the top, you should be good. All right, let's go to the oven. All right, guys, so now we wait. For the cherry pie, it's gonna be 20-25 minutes, but remember for the pumpkin pie, it's been in there for about 10 minutes, so it's still missing around 30 minutes still. You do wanna shake it, it's a custard pie. As long as you shake it and it wiggles back like Jello, it doesn't seem so liquidy, then you should be good. So let's just wait now. All right, it's been about 25 minutes, so for the time difference that I put them in, they should be done. Again, remember for the custard pies, you just have to check if they're done. If they wiggle, they should be okay. And then for our cherry pie, as long as it has a really nice color on the top, we should be okay. All right? So this is our pumpkin pie. Ready to be chilled and topped with whipped cream. Go. We have a nice color on the cherry pie as well. And that's it, guys. Again, we did 2 types of pie dough. We went through how to make pie dough, and we made 2 types. We made a flaky pie dough for making our cherry pie, and we made a mealy dough for making our pumpkin pie. And that's it. That's all for pie and pie dough. Thank you so much for joining this chef session in the name of Itzel Marquez and Chef Dominguez. See you in the next one.